episode of the Wet Dreams podcast. At the time of hearing this episode, it's probably in the new year. My name is Jose Gonzalez. I'm your co-host. I'm a sex therapist and a mental health counselor. And this is...
I'm Dr. Brad Hinman. I am a sex therapist, a licensed professional counselor, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome to another episode. I'm excited. Today we're going to be unveiling our little model that we've been working on, or at least part of it. We're going to have throughout, this next year, I suppose, we're going to be teaching our guys how to work through pornography addiction, sex addiction, in the way that we see our people or the way that we treat our people. And we kind of created a little model, like an 8-step model. I think it's 8 steps, to work on getting out of addiction. And hopefully that'll springboard into us writing a book. Maybe that'll force us to do it more now. But, yeah, I mean, so we've developed this model over how long have you been seeing people for pornography addiction and sex addiction and stuff like that? How long have you been seeing?
13 years.
13. Nice. And I've been seeing people probably since I've been at the practice, like 5 years or so.
It's more like 10.
10. It feels like 10. No, it was kind of like 10 when I came, but then I left and came back. Anyways, they don't care. But, our collective, experience, we've seen like themes and like some things that have worked, some things that haven't worked. So I'm excited to share about like this model and how we see it. Not saying this is the only way to do it. There's plenty of people that do it differently and plenty of other models. But what we found to work is kind of these things. So one of the first steps that we talk about when a guy comes in with, again, pornography addiction or sex addiction type of stuff, is to create distance from that behavior. So that's kind of our first step in our model. And the thing that we're going to talk about today is creating distance. What do you feel is like important early on to create that distance when you're starting out treating pornography addiction? What do you think? Why do you think that's important?
I think it's important because when we do something, when we make a decision or we do a behavior, it creates like a neural pathway in our brain. And the more that we do that, the stronger the pathway becomes. And so then what that means is it becomes easier to make that same decision next time. And so if it's, for example, if you're looking at porn and that's not okay with your personal worldview, or it's not okay in your relationship, each time that you look at porn, you're making it easier to look at porn next time. So if you create distance, you're kind of separating those two, you're separating your thoughts and emotions from the behavior, and you're creating distance there in the middle. So it makes it harder to make that decision next time.
Right, exactly. Right. And for so long, our guys that come in, it's quite automatic. I mean, I think, at least in my experience, it's like you're worse off, quote unquote, when you're doing the thing, not even thinking about what you're doing. It's just porn is so like secondary, so like they're not thinking about it, that it's so ingrained and integrated into like your daily life or whatever. I feel like that's usually when it's like worse off, if you will. Like guys are worse off in their addiction, I suppose, right?
Right.
So I think it's important to start putting some blocks in between of when you're tempted to then when you use the behavior. I feel like that's a lot of the early step, right?
Right. And the earlier you can do that, the more success you're going to have in changing that behavior. Because otherwise it just becomes automatic, right? You're on like autopilot. And you're, whatever the trigger is or the stimulus was, for you to look at porn or sexually act out, you're automatically doing it. Like I've had a lot of clients say to me, I wasn't even tempted and I wasn't even wanting to look at porn, and then I was just looking at porn.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's almost like they wake up and they're looking at porn in the middle of it. They're not really sleeping, but
Yes.
It becomes aware that they're looking at porn.
Yep.
And they weren't intending on doing it. And so then that's when I talk about you're on autopilot, right? You're just doing it without even thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Which then means to me, you're not really probably getting any enjoyment out of that.
Right.
If you're on autopilot,
right. If you're not really aware of what's happening, what's the point?
Yeah.
Right? Like driving to work when you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm at work. Like you didn't remember the drive. You didn't look at the pretty trees or whatever. You didn't enjoy that. Yeah. So with creating distance, I think a big one, or at least the beginning of that, is accountability. Right? I mean, I think what are some ways we kind of encourage our guys to increase their accountability early on?
There is accountability software. Mm-hmm. It's, if you're not aware of what it is, you download the software, or download an app or whatever. I don't really know how it works, but like electronic stuff. But
Spelliamos. You put a spell on you. Very good.
You download it. It tracks what websites you go to, and then what it does is it searches for keywords. And then it alerts whoever you've set up as the recipient of that report. So it actually sends a report to somebody, saying, Jose accessed these 3 websites that have these alert words on them. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so sometimes they're innocuous. Like I've had alerts be sent for like YouTube videos on, like having a mole removed or something. And so because it's talking about skin or something like that, right? And so then it alerts.
Right.
But they're fairly good. And I mean, as time goes by, they're honing that and becoming better at it. But that's the basic gist, is if you go to a website that contains certain words, it's going to alert whoever you set up to have that. Mm-hmm. And so those are great at the beginning. Mm-hmm.
That's where I was going.
You knew what I was going to say. So when a client first comes to me for help, and often they're already doing that, like they've already downloaded that, probably because their partner told them to.
Yep. True.
And so I'm fine with that at the beginning, but I want them to be accountable for their own behavior. Because now, like if you have that accountability software, you're not looking at porn because you don't want your partner to get a report. You're not looking at porn because you're choosing not to look at porn. Right. And so I want my clients to not look at porn because they're choosing not to look at porn. Right. But at the beginning, they may not be ready for that. Like they're obviously, if they were strong enough to choose not to look at porn, they wouldn't be coming to us for help.
Exactly.
They would have done it already. Yeah.
Yep.
And so, so that's why at the beginning, I'm not opposed to downloading that, but that should not be a permanent solution. And it shouldn't be a long-term solution either. Use that. This is the way I say it to my clients. Like use that to get some traction into your recovery, and use it to like help yourself realize I don't have to do this every day. Look at porn. I don't have to access these websites. And so then once you realize that you don't have to, then it becomes easier to not. Right. And so then. But I've also had clients say, okay, I think I'm ready to not have this software, and then they end up using it. Right,
for sure. It's a balance. But that's so much of it, too, I think, of like this realization, especially early on, of like, oh, I can do this thing without porn or whatever, like getting some momentum of like, oh, I can do a Thursday and not need porn, you know what I mean? But like when they're in this pattern for so long, there's this lie, and we'll get to that in later episodes, but there's this lie that they're telling themselves, or porn is telling them, of like, oh, you need me, you need this to get through the day, or you need this to not feel this, you need to, you know what I mean? So it's like beginning that process of what does it feel like without porn, or other sexual behaviors,
Right. So another thing that sometimes people do is they'll have accountability partners as well. And so an accountability partner is somebody who you talk to about your temptations and your cravings and stuff like that, and your use. So research is kind of ambivalent about accountability partners, whether they work or not.
Yeah.
It's really, to me, up to the individual.
Sure.
Like if you think an accountability partner is going to work for you, then by all means get an accountability partner. But again, are you choosing not to use porn because you're going to have to talk to your accountability partner about it? Or are you choosing not to use porn because you've decided that you don't want to use porn anymore?
Right.
And so your partner should not be your accountability partner. Let me say that again.
Yep. Please, for the people in the back.
Your romantic partner should not be your accountability partner. And that's because this person is in a relationship with you. They love you. They care about you. They want what's best for you, but they shouldn't really be your policeman. Right. So it would be, it's not really, but it's the image that's popping into my head is if like your partner that you rob banks with is also your policeman, right? Like it's
right. The prosecutor.
Yeah.
You know?
Like it doesn't really work that way.
Sounds like a good TV show.
Yeah, right. There you go. I'm sure there's probably been a show like that. And so, but it just puts your partner in a really awkward position because now they're hurt generally from what partners are telling us. They're hurt by your sexually acting out. And when you go to them and say, hey, I'm tempted to look at porn, or I'm tempted to hook up with this person, that's going to hurt your partner. Like it because they have feelings of, well, what's wrong with me? Why aren't you choosing me? Right? Why aren't you coming to me to get your sexual needs met? And so for them to hear you say that, it's going to be hurtful for them. And so that's a big reason why your partner should not be your accountability partner. But you can choose someone else, like a friend that you trust. I mean, it needs to be somebody that you trust and that you're going to be honest with. It's that I've had clients that have accountability partners and they lie to their accountability partners. And keep their use a secret. And then I'm like, well, then you're defeating the whole purpose. Like you're not using that for what it's for.
Right.
Even. Right. And so but it still needs to be somebody you trust. Sometimes they use their pastor. Sometimes they use a friend. Sometimes they pick somebody else who also has the same problem.
Right.
And so
Family member, parents I've had. The one thing on that note, the one thing I feel like I hear often is like a guy will come into my office and be like, hey, I watched porn for a minute and stopped, versus staying and watching a lot, but then their partner still gets hurt no matter what. So it's like it's not great for either of them. The partner's getting hurt, and then the guy that's coming into my office, while there was improvement, it doesn't feel like that if they're sharing that with their partner. It may be like, oh, I was on Instagram instead of porn. For us in the office, they're like, okay, cool, that's a step. Like you didn't like take it further. You didn't actually go to porn. But for most partners, it all feels the same. Like, oh, we were still on Instagram looking at women. Like what? You know what I mean? Like, so then that like diminishes at times for the individual, for the guys that come in, their progress, or they're feeling good about like, okay, that's a step that I took, And
so that's important. This is probably not part of the plan to talk about today,
but now.
It is now. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who has a sexual addiction, or if you're the accountability partner of somebody who has a sexual compulsive problem, we need to affirm those people, right? When they make small progress, we need to affirm them and tell them, hey, good job, right? Yes, you're not where I want you to be. Yes, it still hurts me that you told me that, because you're still doing something that I don't like, even though it's not the thing that I don't like. You're still doing something that I'm not really comfortable with. So a lot of times what happens is we don't affirm those people because they're not perfect. But that's not... there's somebody smarter than me that said perfect is the enemy of good, right? And so you need, if they're making a good decision, in other words, not using, right, then we need to affirm them for that. Because if we affirm them, then they're going to repeat that behavior, because our brain likes praise. And so if you praise somebody, they're going to do more of that so that they get more praise. And vice versa. If you withhold praise, then they're going to be like, why am I even trying?
Right.
Because they're not, nothing I do is ever good enough. How many times have we heard that, right?
Tons.
And so that's where that comes from, is because you're not affirming them. And so unfortunately, a lot of times partners withhold affirmation because, like I said, the person isn't perfect, and the person that's supposed to affirm says, I'm not going to affirm because I don't want them to think everything is okay. That's fine. You can say, hey, good job. You only stayed on Instagram instead of going to a full-blown porn site. However, I still want you to keep trying. Like, you can still add that in there.
Right.
But you need to affirm them.
Right. For sure. And it's the hurt. I mean, the hurt feelings, and it's valid, but it ultimately doesn't get what either of you want if you're like, if they're feeling bad about it or making, I mean, of course, accountability, there's, taking responsibility of like, okay, I need to do better, but it doesn't help if you pile in some more on it, like, oh, that wasn't good enough or whatever. Or like one of the examples I remember was like a partner didn't like that their spouse drank coffee or something, or maybe sugar, I don't know, and they didn't love that, but having a conversation of like, would you rather them drink coffee or would you rather them watch porn? You know what I mean? Like, It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, and that's also a common thing. Guys will switch like something else, throw something in there, whether it's sugar eating or whatever, but like trying to be, as an accountability partner, trying to keep it in perspective and objective of like, okay, that's not great either. Sure. But also that's a step in the right direction,
Yep. Yeah.
It's hurt feelings. People are hurt, so they're like, no, that's not good enough.
Yes,
I get it.
And we think by shaming somebody, it's going to make them make better choices, and actually, the exact opposite is true.
Yep.
Shaming people makes them make worse decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. So accountability is a big one. Some of the examples that I kind of wrote down. A lot of people will use the iPhone feature, like the screen time feature, which that another side note that I was thinking about was like, if you have accountability software, make sure you have a password on it. I've had guys where they'll have it, but then like they can still put their same password, or it's not like it's not fully closed, and it's like, okay, well, what's the point of having accountability stuff if it's not closed in that way, you know? And really a way to like keep the lines open of like, maybe in the future I'll watch porn, or like, I don't want to totally there's some of that of like feelings of like totally closing a loop like that, and feeling uneasy. Guys have talked about that for sure. I don't know if you have a comment about that.
Oh yeah, there's and the way I describe it to my clients is, your brain wants those good chemicals. It wants those chemicals that make it feel good, and so your brain will try to find a way around these accountability techniques that we're talking about today. Your brain will want to circumvent that so that it can look at porn, because it gets good feelings from that, or good chemicals from that. And so you need to plan, like if you're going to do something like this, you need to plan for, how is my brain going to try to circumvent this? And how can I stop it from trying to get around the cheat codes or something, right?
Yes.
Because it's really you that we're like I talk about your brain, but it's you, right? Like you're trying to circumvent this so that you can do what you want to do, and not what you're supposed to be doing. Right. And so what little doors are you going to leave open so that you can look at porn later, right? Yep. Because there's always ways around this stuff. And are you in this to try to figure out a way around it, or are you in this to get better? Right. And so you need to act as though you are trying to get better so that you stop trying to circumvent the system.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like using your powers for good. I think is the big one. Like for so long, the guys that come in, they're like looking for ways to circumvent whatever, or loopholes or whatever. Like, so it's like, how about we use that power for good? Like, think about the things that are gonna attack your sobriety, if you will. And then how you can close that loop rather than the other way around, you know? Yeah.
Are you spending as much time trying to circumvent porn as you are trying to circumvent not looking at porn?
Right, exactly. Exactly. For real. Exactly. Yeah. Sweet. So accountability, definitely big one in the beginning that often is like almost like first steps that would happen after getting caught and stuff like that. But another part of it is like identifying triggers like that. I feel like the beginning part of like, okay, when are you doing the things you're doing? When are you tempted or stuff like that? You want to talk a little bit about like triggers and stuff?
Yeah. And so typically I talk to my clients about, is there a time of day where you're more susceptible to looking at porn? Is there, and I don't mean like 4:03 p.m. Like I'm talking about like, is it first thing in the morning? Is it last thing at night?
Lunch break.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Right. Is like for college, like a break between classes. I've had clients tell me that sometimes they'll leave class even like 10 minutes early, go home, look at porn and masturbate and before their next class. Right. And so, like when is your times that you're more susceptible? Also, sometimes people are visually triggered, right? Like sometimes in the summer when people are wearing less clothes. And so you see somebody jogging by and you're like, oh. And what I tell my clients is you're taking like a mental snapshot of that so that you can use that later to get going and get yourself to look at porn because you're remembering that image.
Right.
So sometimes it's times of day. Another time of day example would be like when you're alone, right? I had somebody tell me once, like, is when the door shuts and I hear that click, my brain automatically wants to look at porn because I'm alone.
Right.
And I know they're going to be gone for a while, right?
Yeah.
And so that's my opportunity to look at porn.
Yeah. That's why our brains are wild. Side note, like the click and then you're triggered. Like, that's insane.
I had a client years ago. He looked at me and was like, "My brain's a dick." And I'm like,
yes. It's so true. Your brain's an asshole.
Yeah, because sometimes your brain like sabotages you. But your brain wants the good chemicals, and it will do whatever it takes to get you to give them that good chemicals, right?
Yep.
And so,
yes.
So sometimes visual triggers, sometimes times of day. Sometimes getting in an argument with your partner. I've had clients tell me that they purposely pick a fight with their partner so that they can look at porn. So, you know, their partner like gets mad and storms off and they're like, great, I'm alone now. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's just kind of exploring when are you most likely to look? What is happening right before that? What kind of emotions are you feeling? Right? And so it's typically for our clients negative emotions, right? So if they're feeling stressed or they're feeling bored or they're feeling lonely, tired, like tired isn't like exhausted, but also sleepy tired. There's some chemicals that like there's 5 or 6 chemicals that are released when you're looking at porn and masturbating. And one of them is a sedative. And so that's why like the joke is that men roll over and fall asleep after sex and women want to talk, right? It's because when we ejaculate, we release a chemical that's like a sedative, and so it makes us sleepy. So that means there's lots of guys out there who look at porn in order to fall asleep.
Yep. Or I've heard a lot, wake up in the middle of the night randomly, but then can't go back to sleep or whatever. Like I've heard that a fair amount too.
And so they look at porn and masturbate so they can go back to sleep. The bad part about that is like sleep is great. I love sleep. But the bad part about that is the more you depend on something else to fall asleep, the less able to fall asleep you're going to be on your own. Right? So in other words, if you take sleeping pills to help you fall asleep, you're going to become dependent on those sleeping pills and you're not going to be able to fall asleep without sleeping pills. So our brains are not only is our brain a dick, it also sabotage. Like it also like works against us in some ways, right? Like, it's lazy. Like why should I work for it and work to fall asleep when you're just going to give me this pill?
Right.
So
Right.
I'm not going to work at it.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Well, and that brings us to another part of the initial steps is like introduction to coping. You know, all those things you're saying is like something's happening with the guys that we see. So we start to, early on in treatment, I think we start to make that connection of like, okay, something's happening, and then you're triggered, and something's happening, whether emotionally or in your life or whatever. So then what you do is you put porn in there. You know, you're coping with something with porn, you know, so it's making that connection, like you're wanting to not feel tired by using porn. You're wanting to not feel bored. You're wanting whatever, you know, you're wanting to not be close to your partner. I don't know, whatever. Like, so it's like making that connection of like the triggers to then the coping part of it. Cause I think the coping is a big part. And I think, I mean, I think conceptually most people understand that, but still, it's still like not, I don't know what it is if people don't believe it or something. I don't know, but I feel like people don't truly make that connection always of like, you can use porn to cope. I don't know. You know what I mean? I think in my experience with people that come in, even though in society, like there's whole movements of like porn and against porn or whatever, those porn movements, I still think people don't get it, you know, fully. Does that make sense? You know?
Yes, it does. I think, and I've heard from a lot of people that they like, one of the tip offs for me is when people say, I just have a really high sex drive.
Yeah.
Okay. You might, but if you're seeking therapy for your porn issue, that's more than just you're really horny all the time. Like it's
right.
You're doing that for another reason. Another underlying reason other than I just want to be sexual.
Right.
Because you have a partner that you can be sexual with. Like, I mean, a lot of my clients have had partners. Not all of them. Some of them are single.
Yeah.
But especially if you have a sexual partner that you can be sexual with, then you're not looking at porn because you're horny. You're looking at porn to cope with the negative emotions or to make yourself feel better or to change, like to forget or whatever, right?
Yes. And even if your partner, I've had partners that were willing to have as much sex as they were wanting to, and still they have a porn. Like, come on now. You know?
Right. And so I feel any addiction or any like out of control compulsive behavior that you're experiencing is a coping mechanism, right? You're using that to cope with negative emotions. And so like parental abandonment or not feeling loved, not feeling good enough during your childhood, not being able to express emotion, right? Like I've had clients that were not allowed to talk about their emotions at all. Yep. Which is welcome to being male, right? Like it's right. And so it's so we're using this thing, the porn, for example, or sex. We're using that to feel, and we're using that to forget about our problems. Like it's common knowledge that people drink alcohol to forget, right? Like, oh, I just went through this breakup, so I'm going to go get drunk, so I don't have to think about it. So we apply that logic to that, but we think, no, people don't look at porn because they're coping.
No, you're just horny.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
You just can't control. You're just a, horn dog. You just sex all the time. That's all you think about. Well, then it's not that far. Like if we realize that people drink to forget, then it's not that big of a stretch to think that people might use porn to forget.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And so the idea is though, like, we need to figure out what it is that they're trying to cope with and help them solve that problem. Right. So, your parents were emotionally unavailable to you as a child. Okay. Well, let's talk about that. Let's work on that. Let's figure out a way that you can be emotionally available for yourself now, instead of continuing to be emotionally unavailable by looking at porn. let's help you to be emotionally available to yourself, and then you won't have to look at porn anymore. As a coping
I
mechanism.
like that. That's a good one. Like being emotionally available to yourself. I feel like that's a underrated thing. You know what I mean? I guess it's emotional intelligence kind of, but you're shutting yourself off to yourself. It's crazy.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
That's exactly when we have an addiction. That's exactly what we're doing.
It's true.
And I'll tell my clients, you need to go back, and I'm going to use your name, but like you need to go back and find the 8-year-old Jose, put your arm around him, and walk him forward. Right? Like help him to be a grown up now. Right? Because being a grown up is big and scary, and it's overwhelming. Adulting is hard.
Yep.
And so, but you need to go back and tell 8-year-old Jose or 10-year-old Jose or whatever, and that's something that we figure out together in therapy is what age we're talking about.
Yes.
And just bring that child forward.
Yeah.
And help them to because you're an adult now, and so tell them I got you. We can do this. I'm here for you. Right? I got your back. So that's part of being emotionally available to yourself.
Yes, exactly. Right. I mean, and that that part of the treatment, if you will, comes over time, but at the beginning of that is knowing, okay, I'm using this thing to change my current state of being, and really how can we use something else to do it in a healthier way, or acknowledge those feelings, of course, too, but use something else that's healthier. That's what we do, especially early on. And then you do it as well. Like you get guys to come up with 5 coping skills minimum. And something that I'll tell guys is if you've identified some of those triggers, like beginning of the day, middle of the day, in the evening, blah, 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 then you're creating coping skills that match those times and match those triggers. Because say you wake up in the middle of the night, maybe you're not going to go in the middle of the night in Michigan winter, maybe you're not going to go outside and take a walk, but that would be a coping skill you would use during the day or during the weekend or whatever. Yep. So I know you've said that too, it's important to start developing these other coping skills that match kind of those triggers as well. But
yep, I always tell people, if at least one of your coping mechanisms need to be something that you can do in the middle of the night, so you're not disturbing people. And I tell them only 2, so a maximum of 2 of those can involve other people. Because again, when you're at 3:00 in the morning, nobody wants to go for a walk with you. Nobody wants to have an hour-long conversation with you.
Right.
I mean, there's probably some people out there that do, but
most people out there.
Yes, most people are not going to be available to have a conversation with you during that time. Most
if you're not my kid, leave me alone.
Yeah, that's right. If the house is not on fire. And so so some of them need to be something that you can do on your own. Like meditation, prayer. If I tell people prayer and meditation is the same thing, because it really is. You're meditating on God when you're praying. So prayer and meditation, that's something you can do by yourself. Listening to music, music can really change our mood. Right? And so, listening to music, learning to play guitar, hopefully that's something you can do at 3:00 in the morning. I don't know. Right. And so the possibilities are really endless. Yeah. Like I mentioned, 3, but, there's tons of things that you can do, and that's really up to the clients. I don't tell them what to do.
Yes.
They figure it out themselves, because whatever the idea I might have may not work for them. Right. They're not into that. Right.
So you shouldn't be doing it. Right. If you're not into it.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be
because it needs to be pointless. Something you enjoy. Right. It's nobody's addicted to eating broccoli, right? It needs to be something you enjoy.
Imagine.
So don't replace some really thing that releases a lot of really good chemicals in your brain with something that's super boring and that you're never going to do.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So it needs to be something that you enjoy doing, at least. And at the beginning, learning a new skill is fine, but it needs to be something that you're not that you don't hate.
Right.
That you're going to learn to like it.
And it won't. And another thing, it won't be as strong, as porn, or there won't be anything. The way I tell guys is like, there's not going to be anything 1-to-1 ratio of like, I'm not going to do porn, I'm going to do this. Like nothing is going to be that level of, intensity as porn. So that's why we tell our guys get a bunch of things. And if you have to do things over and over, do the same 5 things until you're out of the woods of like your temptation, like fine. There's not going to be something that is the same level, eventually, but especially not early on. Definitely not,
Yeah, because if let's say our client is 35, they've probably been looking at porn for at least 20 years. And so anything that you do one time is not going to be the same as something you've done for 20 years. Like, no, it's not going to be as enjoyable, right? And so, because I remember years ago, I had a client come back and was like, I did the thing and it didn't work. Yeah, because you did it once. Right? Anything that you do once, like anything that you do one time for the first time, like it's probably not going to be the most exciting, best thing that you've ever done.
Exactly.
Maybe sometimes it is, but
yeah, I guess.
But most of the time, no. Right? You need, and I tell my clients, like, you've practiced looking at porn and masturbating and you're really good at it because you practiced it over and over and over again. And you're super skilled at it now. You know exactly what you like. You know exactly what websites to go to. So when you choose, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to play basketball instead of looking at porn, well, you're going to suck at it. Because it's not going to be as good. Because you haven't been practicing for 20 years, right?
Yep.
And so, like, give yourself a break. Like be patient with yourself. Allow yourself to develop other skills and other hobbies other than looking at porn and masturbating. And you will get better at it.
Yep.
But it needs to be something you enjoy. Right?
Yes.
Because then you're going to look forward to it. It's not going to be a chore. It's not going to be a drudgery.
Yeah. And then another strategy that come to mind too is like on the note of like calling people. Like the other thing that guys kind of struggle with sometimes is like, I don't want to call someone and discuss my stuff, especially with someone that doesn't know about the struggle or whatever. I've told guys, like, call them and talk about anything. You don't have to talk about the actual struggle. Just talk. They don't have to know that conversation is helping you not use.
Right.
It's fine. Just talk regular.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's another one that sometimes will get guys hung up. Like, but I think it's a good strategy.
It's a good point. I've heard that too. Well, I don't want to call anybody because I don't want to tell them I'm tempted. Just say, I've been thinking about you and I want to know how you're doing. Right. I'm just checking in.
Right.
You don't need to be like, hey, I'm tempted to look at porn. I mean, you can say that to your accountability partner, right? Because that's what they're for.
Yes.
But other people, that's not really what they didn't sign on to that relationship. So you probably shouldn't tell them, right? But just check in with, like you said it perfectly. Like, they don't have to know that you're calling them so that you don't look at porn. They don't need to know that.
Exactly. For sure. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, so I think this is, so really what it comes down to, and we kind of wrote this out, like all of this initial step lays the groundwork. I mean, I think all of these steps kind of build on each other, but the initial step of creating distance is really creating the groundwork of like falling out of love with porn, and it's funny. I mean, we're going to talk about it. We've probably said it in other podcasts, but especially in this model where we like to personify or whatever pornography, but it's really like this dysfunctional relationship that you've been in, that now if you're at this point of coming into our office, more often than not, guys are like, okay, I'm done with this shit. Like, I'm done. Like, let's go, generally. So this is the breakup of porn. You're getting out of the relationship with stalker X or something. You know what I mean? Which is porn. Like, so this first step is that. If I were to summarize, it's like falling out of love with it. Yeah,
and it is because and there's more to the falling out of love thing. I mean, that is exactly right, and it's all like part of distancing yourself from that, right? And so another part of falling out of love with it is using words like dysfunctional relationship with our clients. And also another phrase that I use a lot is, that's a lie that porn tells you, right? Like, I can't be happy with just one partner, or I need to ejaculate on this person's face, right? Like those are lies that porn tells you.
Or if I have an erection, I have to do something with it.
I have to act on this. No, it'll go away on its own, right? Like,
I'm not gonna die,
right? And so, just pointing out, like as a therapist, those are lies that porn tells you. In other words, and also you're believing them, right? You're acting on those lies, and so those subtle phrases that we use helps people fall out of love with porn, right? Because we think like when we start using porn and we habitually use porn, we come to start thinking like this is helping me, or these people care about me, or this is some form of intimacy for me. Those are all lies. It's not. Those people do not care about you. They don't know you. They don't even know you exist. And if they do, it's because they want your money.
Right. Exactly.
And so, people think porn is free, and there's a lot of free porn out there. But the whole idea of free porn is to get you to pay for porn, right? To get you hooked on so that you subscribe to this website for a monthly fee so that you can see more of what you want to see and less of the stuff you don't want to see, right? Or you start purchasing pictures from people, from amateur porn makers, right?
Or whatever.
Yeah. And so but again, those people don't care about you. They only want your money. And so again, that's another lie that porn tells you, right? So it's a way to create, to fall out of love with porn, because it's going to break that cycle. It's going to break that circuit in your brain that only good comes from this, because it's not. There's a lot of bad that comes. Like if you're coming to see us in therapy, there's bad coming from porn in your life.
It's gotten to a bad point. For sure.
And so helping people realize that and fall out of love with porn.
Yep. Sweet. This is exciting. I like it. I think this is a nice way to do it. We're going to have in our show notes, we'll be able to share like our PDF of our motto or whatever. I'm super excited. And it was nice to talk about kind of the initial steps. Like this is the first things the guys come in like, help. It's a lot, but it's going to take some time to kind of to get some distance from that behavior. And this is the first step, is getting accountability, coping, and talking about triggers. But we definitely are going to go into a bunch of other stuff, talking about history, talking about, where does emotions come into it, and all that stuff. But yeah, do you have any other thoughts about creating distance? I think this was a good episode.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll have more resources available. Feel free to check out the show notes with the PDF. Comment on our socials, Wet Dreams with a Z, and let us know what you think about this kind of step one of treating and getting better from porn addiction, and because we want to hear from you. And if you want to add, or if you have questions or whatever, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. The Wet Dreams podcast and any content posted is intended for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes only. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining a medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.